Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host, Matt Filipovitz. Matt, anything new?
The AFC title game just wrapped about 25-ish minutes ago. So the Chiefs are very lucky in that they avoid the Chicago Bears in the Super Bowl this year. I am not very interested in this year's Super Bowl, which is a bad thing to say on a podcast about Penn State football, which has a lot of Eagles fans. But I was really hoping the Bills were going to make it. That would have been just such a cool story. So, what are you going to do? Yeah.
Yeah, them making it the first year that O.J. Simpson is no longer with us would have led to people having some questions. But yeah, of course, the Super
Cannot
Bowl
believe that's the connection you drew here. That's unbelievable.
Listen, all I'm saying is that if the Bills made the Super Bowl then, people would have gone, okay, curse of OJ, and then we would have gotten into some weird stuff. But yeah, of course, Penn State has a few players in the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs, Hunter Norzad is on their roster. Philadelphia Eagles, of course, Saquon Barkley is on their roster along with Tariq Castro Fields and Jahan Dotson. We're obviously not going to be spending too terribly much time talking about the Super Bowl. Just obviously best of luck to all those guys. I mean, I don't have a dog in the fight other than I root for Penn State guys. And Matt, I'm sure you agree with me. After how this last year went for him, seeing Saquon Barkley win the Super Bowl, and with how things tend to go for the Eagles, probably win Super Bowl MVP if they end up winning the game would be storybook.
I shared this with our Slack a couple days ago, Bill. A lot of our listeners know I grew up around Saquon. Our towns played for a trophy every year, and I pulled up the stat line Saquon had against my mighty Northampton Concrete Kids my senior year. Bill, he had 6 carries for 140 yards, and it looked like he was trending that way after he had 65 yards on his first 3 carries on Sunday. So I'm rooting extremely hard for Hunter Norzad, Saquon Barkley, TCF, and Jahan Dotson. Fellow Lehigh Valley kid. Very cool to see the Philadelphia Eagles repping 2 people I personally played against, and Jahan as well. So just very, very cool.
Yeah, and if you would like to talk about the Super Bowl with us, by all means, you could do that over on social media somewhere. But we're here to talk about something else. We're recording this on Sunday night, which means that earlier in the day, Ohio State had its championship celebration, and almost immediately after that ended. So I don't want to say it's the worst kept secret in college football, but something that seemed to have been gaining a lot of momentum over the last couple of days came into fruition as Penn State was able to hire Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator for Ohio State the last couple of years, to take the defensive coordinator job at Penn State after Tom Allen left to take over at Clemson. Knowles, about as good of a reputation as you could have for a defense coordinator from Philadelphia. From Philadelphia originally, has worked his way up the ranks after playing his college ball at Cornell. 2010, he was hired as the defense coordinator at Duke and has been a Power 5 defense coordinator ever since. He had a very prominent stint when he was at Oklahoma State that led to him getting the job at Ohio State. He was a strong candidate for Penn State's defensive coordinator job that offseason. And now he's in Happy Valley. And Matt, it's one of those things that, I'm going to give as much credit to him as possible because he deserves every ounce of credit for this. Nate Bauer, Blue White Illustrated, has been all over this, been saying for a few days that this was something that the wheels had been in motion on. Nate's a great guy. Been getting a bit of shit over the last couple of days. I want to make sure Nate gets all the praise that he could possibly get for being on top of the story, reporting it out, and getting it correct.
Shout out Nate.
Yeah, shout out Nate. You're a mensch. And now we're at a point where we've had a couple of days to digest the possibility that this could happen. I was very optimistic based on Nate's reporting and some stuff that I had heard elsewhere and read elsewhere, whatever. But it was still pretty wild to see that, it came through in the wave of different notifications, a wave of different reports from people. Then I think Pete Thamel was the one nationally who ultimately broke it, that Jim Knowles is going to be the defensive coordinator at Penn State.
I was picking up my EpiPen from the this is a really long story and it's not interesting at all, but I'm going to share it. I was picking up my EpiPen from my pharmacy, which is in the grocery store, and I forgot my phone in the car. And I had a moment where I was like, it'd be pretty funny if I got back to my phone in the car and I had a notification that Jim Knowles was Penn State's defensive coordinator. That didn't happen, but it did ping when I was driving home for that notification. So that was pretty funny. Bill, this is a big boy move for Penn State. Penn State tried to hire Jim Knowles back in what would that have been, Bill, 2022, when they eventually hired Manny Diaz after Jim Knowles
Yeah.
led
Yeah.
Oklahoma State to the Big 12 title game. They did not win that Big 12 title, but Oklahoma State turned it completely around for what you think a Big 12 defense in the late 2019s, early 2020s was. And he really could have been Penn State's DC had Penn State had the alignment that James Franklin has been banging on about for the last decade. Penn State finally has all of its ducks in a row. Everybody is paddling in the same direction. And Penn State made maybe the biggest move I've seen this program or this football team make in my lifetime to go out there and hire away the defensive coordinator from the reigning national champions and the team in your conference that has kept you at arm's length for the better part of 25 years. This is an insane move by Pat Kraft and James Franklin to be able to bring this kind of money in, convince Jim Knowles to make this kind of move. And now this is the best group of coaches Penn State has had on its football field, maybe ever. Andy Kotelnicki was the 2023, I think 24/7 Sports is assistant coach of the year, coordinator of the year, whatever the official title was. And then Jim Knowles could win the Broyles Award any of the last 6 years, and it would have been extremely warranted. There are guys running the offense and running the defense now who can give Penn State championship level results. And I am just we got to give Pat Kraft and James Franklin the biggest pat on the back for pulling this off. This is the biggest of big boy moves they can make.
One thing that I want to make sure we one thing I want to make sure we point out is that this was a lightning in the bottle thing. Like, yes, Penn State had tried to hire Jim Knowles in the past and hadn't been able to. And there's a lot of stuff in here that reflects really well. Like, it reflects very well on James Franklin that in 2021 or 22, he had this guy pegged as the guy he wanted to be the defensive coordinator. And he knew, if I have my way, Jim Knowles is going to be my defensive coordinator. And ultimately, Ohio State was not only able to hire him, but in each of the last 3 seasons, when Penn State, that first year, the game was a little bit different. Ohio State had a lot of havoc plays in that. But each of the last 2 years, Ohio State's defense has put the clamps on Penn State. And I think
the last 2 years in this game, sorry, Bill, it's been demoralizing and suffocating, I think, are the 2 words to describe the last 2 Penn State offensive outputs against Ohio State. And I'll tell you what, the losses to Ohio State before that didn't feel that way. That is the Jim Knowles effect for sure.
Yeah, and I think there is, it says a lot about James Franklin. We know that James Franklin, as Penn State fans, usually has a really good eye for coaches. You look through the guys he has hired over the years, and he has tended to hire guys who, at the bare minimum, had sterling reputations by the time they got to Penn State. So this is just further proof of concept of that. It says a lot about James Franklin's ability to identify those guys. He arguably has the best coordinator tandem in college football. I haven't sat down and gone through all of them. Very strong case to be made that no school in college football has better coordinators than Penn State.
Let me see where Ted Roof's coaching really quick.
I think he's unemployed.
I know, that's a mean joke. I'm sorry.
I think it says a lot about Pat Kraft and his willingness to win and his willingness to make a splash and his willingness to do whatever it takes to get Penn State over the line. And those are 2 really important things to mention here. I also think we need to take a second to appreciate how crazy it is that in the same offseason, not even in the same offseason, Indiana had to fire Tom Allen last year. And Tom Allen had to be willing to take a coordinator job, in part, presumably in part because Indiana was paying him a lot of money and he could just get right into coaching a defense, didn't have to do it big money, whatever that might be. And he did a good job as Penn State's defensive coordinator. But the real lightning in the bottle stuff is that Tom Allen, after 1 year, had to decide he wanted to change of scenery. And then the real lightning in the bottle stuff was that after that 1 year, after that same year, Jim Knowles had to decide my race is run here at Ohio State. Like, if Tom Allen doesn't leave, all the reporting indicates that a school like Oklahoma, a school like Notre Dame was going to be in position to get Jim Knowles' services. Penn State needed to have an opening. Jim Knowles had to be willing to leave Ohio State. And like, it's just this remarkable coming together of factors that, I know a lot of Penn State fans haven't been really able to wrap their head around it, even as the reporting's been out there for the few days. And the big reason they haven't been able to wrap their head around it is because this kind of stuff doesn't happen. Not just to Penn State, like it just doesn't happen in college football that guys are the only time I can ever remember stuff happening to this extent is when like guys would leave for Bama when Saban was there and they knew that was a guaranteed next step to a head coaching job.
I mean,
like,
think about think about how obsessed with avoiding lateral moves James Franklin has been. He talks about that all the time. You never want your assistant coaches to leave for lateral moves. I mean, obviously, there's been some exceptions to that rule. Charles Huff left to go coach running backs at Alabama under Saban. That's a whole different ballgame. But if you think about how obsessive, and I'll call Penn State a tier B, program, just considering the hierarchy of college football. For a tier A program to have a lateral loss of a guy to a tier B program is kind of unheard of. And I get Penn State is really close to, breaking into that tier A, but they're frankly not there yet at time of recording. And when Jim Knowles made this move. So for this to work out the way that it did, Bill, it's a great point just to highlight how rare this truly is. And Jim Knowles is 59 years old. He's bounced around a ton. He's a career assistant. He just clearly wants to coach ball. How long he's at Penn State for, I don't know. But this tells me Penn State views this opportunity they have in front of them in the expanded playoff. I'm ready to reevaluate my stance, Bill, that I don't think Penn State can win a national title in college football. I think Penn State can do that just based upon what I saw in the college football playoff this past year. And I think that this is an acknowledgement that Penn State truly believes that they can be a team that climbs the mountain. And Jim Knowles has proven he can climb the mountain. And I'll tell you what, he's going to do a damn good job making sure everyone else in that room knows what it takes to climb that mountain. And I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, bare minimum, just having a guy who can immediately walk in, put his national championship ring on the table and say, this is how we're doing things was like, nice. And
yeah, I'll take it.
Some stats I want to highlight with Jim Knowles from Ohio State. This past year, Ohio State was first nationally in opponent yards per play at 4 yards per play. They were first nationally in team sack percentage, sacking opposing quarterbacks on 10.71% of dropbacks. And one thing that I thought of after this hire was made was how frequently Franklin talked about like takeaways and negative plays and just like havoc plays and how big of an emphasis he places on those kinds of things. Like yards per rush attempt, 2.7 yards per rush, which was second nationally. Yards per pass attempt, Ohio State allowed 6 yards per attempt, which was tied for seventh nationally. Yards per completion, 10 yards, tied for third nationally. You look at SP Plus, he took over at Ohio State. They were 20th in defensive SP Plus the year before he got there. That year he was at Oklahoma State, was fourth nationally in defensive plus Oklahoma State during his final season. First year at OSU, took a little bit of time to get some stuff implemented, and they were 23rd nationally. There was a lot of young players on that team. There was a lot of getting new guys involved. I'll pull up their depth chart and look through it here in a second, but it took him a little bit of time to get his stuff implemented. There had been some rumors of tension with Larry Johnson that had been there forever. And I don't know how much that factored into things, but 2023, Ohio State was second nationally defensive SP plus. 2024, they were first nationally in defensive SP plus. Ohio State's defense was basically the backbone of their, for how good they were on the offensive side of the football, was basically the backbone of their football team.
Oh,
and
yeah.
For what the old saying is that X's and O's are greater than Jimmy's and Joe's, or Jimmy's and Joe's are greater than X's and O's. Like, basically it requires having players more than any coach. And there is definitely some truth to that. But when you have a guy who knows how to put guys in positions to be successful and how to best take advantage of the guys that you have, then you're going to end up doing some really special things. You can end up doing some really special things. And when you think of what Knowles has been able to do over the course of his career, Matt, and you think of the situation that he is walking into at Penn State, by no means a perfect roster. There are some question marks here and there on the defense, but still a very, very, very good collection of players.
It's the Penn State defense. There's a floor here. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, this is a really good mix of an exceptional coach walking into an exceptional situation where he will be given, in all likelihood, the free rein to run his defense the way that he wants, with talented players, with a staff around him that is fantastic. A huge part of this is that Anthony Poindexter is going to, per report by Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports, staying for another year. So there's going to be continuity on the defensive side of the football for Penn State. Like, if you told me when Tom Allen left that they were going to end up with Jim Knowles, I would have said you were crazy. I wouldn't have been surprised if they made a push for Jim Knowles, but the fact that all of this is happening, like, this is dream stuff for Penn State football.
When we get down to it, and it's 200 and like a million days between now and Nevada. Also, side note, Bill, I didn't realize Ohio State started their schedule next year with Texas. That's kick ass. Unrelated. It's going to feel different, this Penn State defense. I think I really highlighted how different the Manny to Tom Allen defense felt. Manny was so aggressive. He played so much man. He blitzed like crazy. Tom Allen didn't really do a lot of that stuff. He still played a lot of man. Penn State's going to play a shit ton of zone defense under Jim Knowles. That's kind of his shtick. He's done that for a long time, dating back to his Oklahoma State days, and even before that at Duke. Penn State is going to thrive on creating turnovers, not to the Manny level, but definitely more than we saw this past year with Tom Allen. And the Penn State defensive line is going to have a lot demanded of it. The Ohio State defense last year did not blitz a lot. They were extremely aggressive with how they used their front seven, though. That defensive line, and especially those edge rushers, and I get Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau are two Sunday players, but they demand a ton out of that front seven, and especially that defensive line. And Penn State's defensive line, I don't think, has a ton of question marks, except for one of the two defensive tackle spots. But when Alonzo Ford comes back, that kind of gets answered for me, to be honest, if he's able to go at what I think he can play at. But yeah, Bill, this is just going to feel very, very different. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. And it is so nice that Penn State, after 5 straight years of opening with a Power 5 opponent, finally gets an on-ramp into the season. And this defense can feel itself out for the first 3 weeks of the season and then have a bye week before prove it against Oregon in Happy Valley and a probable whiteout maybe. I mean, that's so far down the line, but I'm so excited to see what comes next for this Penn State defense. And it's an absolute, program defining move for James Franklin to be able to get a guy like Jim Knowles in to be the guy to run the defense.
Yeah. So I think if it's not, it's abundantly clear to everybody that you and I are very much on board with what Penn State's defense is going to have going forward with Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator. There's a story that I want to read from it was tweeted out by a Buckeye pal of mine. I don't know what the story is from. I apologize to whomever the author is. But a thing that I remember from Jim Knowles is that, as we all know, unfortunately, Penn State had the ball on the doorstep against Ohio State. 4 chances, didn't punch him in. Texas had the ball on the doorstep against Ohio State. 4 chances. Not only did they not punch it in, Ohio State's defense actually scored a touchdown. And here's an anecdote from that moment. A trip to the national title game boiled down to this: Ohio State leading 21-14 in the latter stages of the fourth quarter. Texas clawing towards the goal line with a 27-yard completion from Quinn Ewers to wide out Matthew Golden and back-to-back pass interference penalties against the Buckeyes. It was at that moment, with 4:04 remaining, at the ball on the 1-yard line in a goal-to-go situation, when someone's voice piped through the phone line in the Buckeyes coaching box above the field. Quote, "Boy, they scored fast there," the unnamed staffer said. To which defensive coordinator Jim Knowles snarled a retort that would prove astoundingly prophetic. They ain't scored yet. I love that mentality.
Mhm.
I love the mentality that, it's not too dissimilar to the mentality that like Manny Diaz brought to Penn State's defense of you're going to have to earn everything against us. We're not going to stop fighting until you get into the end zone. And like you mentioned, the defense is going to end up looking a little bit different. It's a little bit unique in that, saying a 3-3-5 doesn't total like a 3-3-5 defense, 4-2-5 defense, whatever you want to say, doesn't totally make a ton of sense. But the thing in his defense is that it's usually 3 down linemen. He likes to play a lot of cover 3 in the back. It's usually 3 down linemen. And along with those 3 down linemen is a linebacker who is more of a hybrid defensive end type who brings havoc. His final year at Oklahoma State, his top guy in terms of sacks was a defensive end named Colin Oliver, who is 6'2" and 225 pounds. Second in sacks was a guy named Brock Martin, who is 6'3" and 250 pounds. Oliver had 11 and a half sacks. Martin had 9. They were 2 of the more productive edge rushers in the country. And Knowles said of kind of that jack position, as it's known, what you're looking for is somebody who is an extremely productive football player, but doesn't fit into anyone's mold. That guy who the defensive line coach says he's not big enough. The linebacker coach said he doesn't read well enough. The running backs coach says he's a good player, but he's not one of the top three running backs. And when I think of that, Matt, and I think of kind of the big concern for me with Penn State's defense going into next season, it is that I don't know who that other defensive end is going to be on the other side of Dani Dennis-Sutton. What I think Jim Knowles ultimately brings is you can use a guy like Max Granville, or you can use a guy like Jalen Harvey, or you can use a guy like, Keon Wiley
That's the
or
name I was going to
Dakari
throw out here
Nelson.
right off the bat, Bill. I was going to throw
You
Keon
could
in there.
use a guy like that in ways that are a little more unique, that don't necessarily require them to put their foot in the ground and line up across from a big old offensive tackle and have to beat them over and over. You can do really fun stuff with them and really unique and aggressive stuff with them instead of, we're going to have 4 guys up on the line of scrimmage. We're going to have our linebackers right behind them. And if this leads to more chaos being brought by the front of Penn State's defense, boy, am I excited for that.
I think the days, we can probably declare this, Bill, the days of the 4-3, or at least, for the foreseeable future, of the 4-3 Penn State defense, the 3 linebackers being out there for the majority of the snaps, or plurality of the snaps even, is probably behind us, which is fine, considering...
The thing I will always say is that no good coach will look at a roster and see a deficiency and go, we're still playing my way.
Right.
And I don't think that if Jim Knowles gets in there and decides that, Penn State would be better off running out a linebacker room of Dom DeLuca, Tamir Robinson, and Tony Rojas over and over with, Dani Dennis-Sutton and Smith Vilbert as his defensive ends. And then, just a defensive tackle room where it's
Zane Durant,
Alonzo
question
Ford,
mark.
Alonzo Ford, and Zane Durant. Like, I don't think he would just out of spite not go for that.
Right.
But I think that in Jim Knowles, you now have spring ball and summer ball to figure out what is the best way, if it requires melding what the roster the best way to put together, what does the roster have? What does Jim Knowles want his defense to do? And how can you find a happy medium that makes it so Penn State's defense is going to be able to be one of the best, if not the best in the country next year?
Yeah, it's going to be again, we have a lot of time to think about it, but Penn State's defensive back room, shout out to Terry Smith and Dex. There's so much talent there. Like, I really do believe that we're going to see Penn State shifting away from the 4-3 they ran for a long time. I get they got rid of a lot of that with Tom Allen, but with Kobe King out the door, off to the NFL, best of luck to Kobe. We'll talk about him later. I think it makes a lot of sense now for Jim Knowles to be able to run kind of exactly what he wants to run and really to mold this in any way he wants to go. Because now without this longtime experience Mike, who just for his leadership alone, it really behooves you to have him on the field. You don't need that anymore. Or you don't have that luxury anymore. So I really want to know what that looks like. And again, we're so far out from really having any idea what that's going to be, but it's just going to feel different again. And not that I didn't enjoy the Tom Allen defensive experience. I just like the way Manny plays defense more. And I think with Jim Knowles, we're heading back towards that Manny Diaz, see ball, get ball. You have to fight me for every single yard. And that is a very fun and very usually successful style of defense.
Yeah. And I was looking it up while you were saying it there, kind of the brains of the operation for Oklahoma State during the final year of Jim Knowles was Malcolm Rodriguez, who is currently a member of the Detroit Lions, 5'11", 225-pound linebacker. Cody Simon was basically that guy. He might have been the green dot. I'd have to double check that.
Well, there was no green dot back then, in fairness.
Well, for Ohio State's defense.
Sorry.
Simon. Sorry. I'm pretty sure he was their green dot this year, 6'2", 235 pounds. Tony Rojas is listed at 6'2", 236 pounds. Like, I would not be stunned if, no disrespect by any means to Kobe King. He was a fantastic football player, but if having a defensive coordinator like Jim Knowles in there means that, more of the traditional Mike linebacker kind of guy isn't on the field. And a guy like Tony Rojas, who has played a lot of football, or a guy like Dom DeLuca, who has played a lot of football, DeLuca 6'1", 230 pounds, are kind of tasked with being the ones who get everything in place on the defense. But that's a long way to go. Yeah. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Like, I'm trying to think that, like, I don't think there's anything else I want to say about Jim Knowles other than, like, again, this is last offseason, we could not have praised James Franklin enough for bringing in Andy Kotelnicki, bringing in the hottest name in the world of offensive coaching in college football, a guy who, like you mentioned, praise after praise after praise for what he did at Kansas, was viewed as a guy who it's a matter of when, not if, he made that big jump. And James Franklin made sure he was the guy who made that big jump. It was going to take something really special for him to make a similar splash this offseason. And yeah, you can't say anything other than, man, what a splash. What a splash this was for James Franklin and the Penn State football program.
Thank you to Clemson for paying like a third of his salary with the Tom Allen buyout. That's kind of funny. And best luck to Tom Allen. It just nothing else to say. No ill will at all. Go have fun at Clemson and go, I don't know, do whatever the ACC is going to do.
I say this affectionately. Tom Allen is a very corny guy, a very like earnest guy, a very like I've had it told to me over and over again by friends from Indiana that Tom Allen is a wrestling coach, just the way that he goes about his business. And because I believe he's a former wrestling coach, like the high school level, and like just that energy and that kind of like profound earnestness is like perfect for Dabo's program.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't mean that as a knock on anybody. Like truly, like he's going to do some really great things at Clemson, and I'm sure Jim Knowles is going to do some really great things at Penn State. And Matt, speaking of great things, how about we talk about home field apparel for a second?
Oh, dude, I love home field apparel.
So do I. I am not currently, I don't think, wearing home field apparel, but if you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice I just look from my head to my toes to make sure that I have home field apparel on, because home field apparel has something for you, something for everyone, and something just to make sure that your closet has something a little bit cool, a little bit fresh, and a little bit up to date. Home field apparel is a premium collegiate brand based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. They're really big Hoosiers fans. They're very happy that we did not take at Penn State, did not take Indiana's defensive coordinator away from them.
He got an extension today.
He did get an extension today. So cross him off of Ohio State's list, I suppose.
True.
It's Ohio. If it's Ohio State, if they want to get into a bidding war with Indiana, they'll get into it and they'll win it. Neither here nor there. We're here to talk about home field apparel, which has something that you are going to want in your closet, whether it's a t-shirt, whether it's a crew neck, whether it's a quarter zip, whether it's a long sleeve shirt, whether it's a pair of joggers. They have socks, they have hats. They just have stuff that makes you feel a closer connection to your team, no matter to your school, no matter who it is. If you're a Penn State fan listening to this, their Penn State collection is absolutely fantastic. If you're an Ohio State fan listening to this because you want to know the local angle on Jim Knowles coming to Penn State, their Ohio State collection is fantastic. If you have a loved one who went to a school that isn't Penn State, isn't Ohio State, is any school, almost any school that you could think of in the world of Power 5 and plenty of G5s as well, Home Field Apparel is going to have something there. And some of their coolest collections are their collections for their smaller schools. I've brought it up on here plenty. I want to get something from their Slippery Rock collection because it's awesome.
It is cool.
Even though I have no connection to Slippery Rock, even in the slightest. And whether it's for yourself, whether it's for a gift for someone else, or whether you know a college sports fan who you just think would like to get something from Home Field Apparel, you can go ahead and use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order. Again, if you've never ordered anything from Home Field Apparel, use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you very much to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this edition of the podcast. Thank you to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring every edition of the podcast. Let's move on, Matt, to talking about something that isn't Jim Knowles, and it's just talking about transfer portal stuff. Penn State, obviously, this time of year, it's a lot of guys going out, a lot of guys coming in, and Penn State has been on both sides of that. And I want to start by talking about the guys who left. Obviously, there's another transfer portal window in the spring, so there's no guarantee that this is the end of the movement for Penn State. But guys going out, Cam Miller transferred to Rutgers. Tyler Johnson transferred to ECU. I don't believe we have answers on Mekhi Flowers and Tyrese Mills, but if I'm wrong, Matt, and I'm sure you'll correct me on this.
I think I saw Tyrese Mills went somewhere, but I do not believe we have anything on Mekhi Flowers yet.
Quick Google search. Let's see. Nothing that I can see yet, but I will continue to continue to waste time as I dig into this. That's his tweet about going to Penn State. Nothing there.
Nothing yet from Mekhi Flowers.
Yeah, nothing from Mekhi Flowers, nothing I saw from Tyrese Mills. And then the two big ones in a lot of people's eyes. Trey Wallace going to Ole Miss and Amari Evans going to Washington. Matt, as you go through that list of guys who left the Penn State football program via the transfer portal, is there one that especially stings for you or especially is going to be a big loss for the Nittany Lions?
I think Amari Evans. I mean, it's tough between him and Trey Wallace because I really like Trey, and I think Trey had a very, very well written message about appreciating his time at Penn State. I mean, this was a 3-star kid who was going to go to Duke. He was primarily a basketball player, and it just really came across very earnest that he really did appreciate his time in Happy Valley. And at some point, sometimes it's best to shake hands, say good game, and wish each other luck. And I wish Trey Wallace all the luck in the world at Ole Miss. I think he can really have a great year in that offense, especially with what Ole Miss is replacing. I think Amari really stings. To see him go in conference to Washington is a tough one to swallow, and I thought he came on really strong towards the end of the year. Penn State has a lot of slot guys on their roster with the Devontae Ross kid coming in from Troy, Caden Saunders, Liam Clifford. Like, there's a lot of guys there. And Amari was that rare speedster who you could line up pretty much anywhere and he could be productive, and it's tough to see him go. And Cam Miller is a guy who everybody on the coaching staff always spoke really highly of. And it sucks that it doesn't suck because if he wants to be at Rutgers, great for him. But it would have been cool for him to go out as a senior and be honored in a way. And I think he would have been a great leader for that defense in 2025. But overall, Bill, like, they weathered the storm really well. I mean, they're going to miss a lot of guys who played a lot of reps for them, but I will never hate on a college kid for thinking he can better his life by being somewhere else. And I wish them all the best. And I hope that Washington and Ole Miss and Rutgers all have great seasons, and we'll see where it all shakes out from there.
Yeah, I believe. I think Amari has one more year. Is that correct?
Like, Amari has 1 year. Trey has 1 year. Cam Miller has 1 year. And everybody else who's transferred has multiple years up for grabs,
Okay.
including Jerry Cross,
So
who left before the bowl game to Memphis.
yes, who did leave before the bowl game. The thing with Amari is that unless Penn State plays Washington in the Big Ten title game, or in the playoff, Penn State's not going to see him, which, I'm not going to say that stings or anything or like that, or like Penn State is dodging a whole huge bullet. I just know in the back of my head, if Penn State had to play against Amari Evans, he was going to have an 85-yard touchdown reception.
Yep.
And, unless he, God forbid this doesn't happen, gets injured, redshirts, and comes back in 2026, Penn State will not be playing him next season. Washington does play Ohio State and Oregon, so that's fun for them. But yeah, I don't think this. I think Cam Miller is a really interesting and difficult loss because with him and Jalen Kimber leaving, it's a big time bet on one of Audavian Collins, Antoine Belgrave Shorter, Elliott Washington. I think AJ Harris and Zion Tracy are pretty established at this point, but I think it's
But Zion plays the slot. That's the only thing.
And he plays the slot.
Yeah.
So you're basically really banking on one of those guys being able to be a guy who can like, I think even if Cam Miller is a consistent 6 out of 10 as a cornerback, there's a big time. I do not ever think you can have enough guys who play cornerback on your football team. So I think there's a chance that is a more annoying loss than we think it's going to be.
Agreed.
But I think Trey Wallace is by some measure the most difficult loss of anyone. Before I dive into this, I would like to apologize. My dog is at my feet eating right now, so if you hear a weird noise in the background, that is not my fault. And if you get mad at it, you're getting mad at a poor little baby who doesn't know any better. But I think Trey Wallace, because of the way that his Penn State career ended, it's kind of gotten forgotten that he was a productive member of Penn State's receiver room.
Oh yeah.
In a lot of years, if your number 2 pass catcher catches 46 balls for 720 yards and 4 touchdowns, you'd like that to be a little bit more productive. It's just that things were kind of out of whack in Penn State's offense because their top target was a tight end, and his numbers don't look as well when you consider he was the number 1 receiver. But I think Wallace was basically stretched as a number 2 receiver, or either a good number 2 or an incredible number 3 receiver, stretched as a guy who had to take on the opposing team's best defensive back every single night. I think at Ole Miss, he's going to be going to an offense where it's really hard not to put up numbers, so he will have an opportunity to do that.
Yep.
But I do think that with there still being some uncertainty in Penn State's wide receiver room, and who knows, maybe between now and then Penn State super ultra, their bagmen really feel themselves and they offer Jeremiah Smith $50 million and, ownership stake in the first, and he ends up coming in the spring transfer portal. Maybe something insane happens like that. But when you look at how we think Penn State's receiver room is going to be put together next year, Tysier Denmark, the 2 transfers they're going to bring in, and then just looking for other guys, I think having a guy like Trey Wallace would have been a nice thing in the room. I don't think it's a killer to not have him, but I think that if you're looking through this list, Tyler Johnson's a guy who is not going to help Penn State, wouldn't have helped Penn State next season in all likelihood. But Kai Flowers, same thing. Tyrese Mills played a little bit, not a guy that Penn State's going to super rely on. Amari's a guy who, maybe he's able to take another step forward in his development, but he kind of is what he is. And if both Amari and Trey are just what they are, I would argue that Trey is a better wide receiver.
Agreed.
And he would be really helpful in Penn State's offense. But ultimately, I don't think, Matt, Penn State is going to, it's when you look at how Penn State's roster is going to look next season, I don't think losing any of these guys are going to be the difference between making the playoff and not, or be the difference between winning the Big Ten and not, or winning the difference between winning a national title and not, unless something totally out of bounds happens. They lost some good football players, but I don't I would be pleasantly surprised, because I want to see good things for these guys, but I would be surprised if any of these guys go on to be the second coming of Jerry Rice or the second coming of Darrelle Revis or anything like that.
So a couple of things, and then we can kind of move off the guys who are heading out the door. Penn State needed a hard reset at the wide receiver position, considering where that room has been. You really cannot have a true hard reset at a position in the real world and in college football because these are kids, these are athletes, and these people are a lot of them to understand that they will not be going pro. And for some of them, maybe it's just getting your degree and figuring out what life is like from there. This is the closest thing you can have to a position room reset. Nobody in that Penn State receiver room has ever been referred to as a number one receiver for Penn State. Nobody is owed any kind of targets. It is a bunch of new guys and then Liam Clifford as the guys who have really made long-term realistic impacts. There's guys with potential in that room, specifically Caden Saunders, who I'm excited to see when healthy. But I mean, Anthony Ivy's still here. I think it's cool. Pennsylvania kid. And I hope he's able to figure this out as he heads into year 4 in the program. But yeah, Bill, like this room needed a reset. It sucks that Amari and Trey, I think, were the two guys who I would have liked to have stuck around. But if you need a reset, you got to rip these Band-Aids off. And I wish them nothing but the best. And I think this may end up just being the best case scenario for everybody involved.
And it's worth mentioning, like you mentioned, Liam Clifford is Penn State's leading returning receiver, having caught 18 balls for 286 yards and a touchdown
among wide
year.
receivers, because the running backs
among wide
more.
receivers,
Yeah.
Yes. Tysier Denmark is going to be coming back. He, caught 2 balls last year, a guy who people have been very optimistic on in Penn State land for quite a while. And then you look through the receiver room, Caden Saunders, I'm worried about him just because I think he might be at a point where injuries have sapped him of so much of his athleticism and explosiveness. But it seemed like he was in line for a big year last year or an important year last year before he ended up getting dealing with some injuries. You look at some of the younger guys that they have in the room, Josiah Brown, recruit from last year, Peter Gonzalez, a recruit from last year. They're bringing in a number of guys in this recruiting class, Matthew Outen, Lyric Samuel, Kobe Howard, and one more, Jeff Exenor, all going to be coming in. A talented, there's talent in the room, and now it's going, a lot of pressure on Marquise Higgins to get the very best out of them. It helps that they were able to get, at this point, some reinforcements in the transfer portal. You look at who Penn State is going to have coming in via the portal. Owen Wafel from Michigan, defensive lineman. TJ Shanahan from Texas A&M, an offensive lineman.
Wait, a couple of things before we forget to highlight this. Wafel has 4 years of eligibility remaining. He has taken a red shirt. Shanahan has 3 years of eligibility remaining after 2 at Texas A&M.
Cool. And then Anai White from Texas A&M, a former monster recruit from Pennsylvania, who I believe is he from Pennsylvania? Or is he? Yeah, he's from Pennsylvania. Who ended up going down to Texas A&M, pulling it up right now, but he was the number 51 overall player in his class, according to On3. He's going to be coming to Penn State. A pair of wide receivers, Devontae Ross from Troy, more of a quick speedster, big play sort of guy, and then Kyron Hudson from USC, Mr. Reliable for USC, a guy who's really good at just getting open, making sure he can catch the ball with his hands. And then the one that every Penn State fan is most excited about, King Mack, coming back to Happy Valley after transferring to Alabama for a year. He's going to be coming back and adding some reinforcements to the Nittany Lions safety room, a guy that I'm sure Jim Knowles is going to be very happy to be coaching. Matt, when we talked about the guys who left, we talked about the guy who you think is the biggest loss in the outgoings. Of the incoming guys, who is the guy that you are the most excited about?
So I've thought a lot about this. I think it's got to be Hudson. I thought it would be Ross, but like I said, Penn State has a lot of guys to play out of the slot, and the numbers Ross put up at Troy, I think, are an unfair expectation, similar to how Mitchell Tinsley was coming in from Western Kentucky, where that offense was basketball on grass, and it's a different league. It's a much bigger league. I think Ross is going to be a very productive player, but what Kyron Hudson is going to bring to this Penn State offense is something no one else in that room has proven they've been able to do, and that is win on the outside. if you remember, Bill, Kyron Hudson torched AJ Harris in the Penn State USC game last year on the goal line with a pretty much outside slant move, cut right back inside. Torched. Great move. Penn State has not had a guy to beat somebody off the line of scrimmage like that in a minute. And maybe that's not exactly fair to say, but I still have, the lasting image of this receiver room for me is no catches in the Orange Bowl. But I think what Hudson can give Penn State is a reliable option. I still think maybe Luke Reynolds or Khalil Dinkins are going to be massive focal points of that passing attack, but Hudson gives you something you do not currently have in that room, and I think he can be a pretty great replacement for Trey Wallace.
Yeah, going through their numbers, Hudson last year at USC, 38 receptions, 462 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I didn't mean to do this, Matt. This is going to make you sound silly for how you pointed this out. And I was going to say Kyron Hudson as well. I should have said that and then read these numbers. But those are Hudson's numbers. And then Devontae Ross, 76 receptions for 1,043 yards and 11 touchdowns.
Yes.
So both of us saying Hudson is a very, on the surface sounds very silly, but I think
we got to think about the Tinsley thing of it all. Like, yeah. I that's why I wanted to address it at the top.
Not necessarily, because Mitchell Tinsley was more of an outside receiver, and Devontae Ross was more of a guy that
he's a slot guy,
that you can kind of move over the place and do some fun stuff with. And this is a bit of an unfair expectation on him, but it's worth remembering that the guy that Devontae Ross filled in for was Tez Johnson, who went to Oregon, ended up lighting it on fire. And I think that, again, I don't think that sort of thing is going to happen. I think that's an unfair expectation to place on him. But I think that giving Andy Kotelnicki a guy who you can do fun stuff with at wide receiver is something that's really valuable and has the potential to be very, very fun. So those are those two. I will still say King Mac, partially because of the novelty of him going to Penn State, leaving for Alabama, and then coming back. It's just like a very funny thing.
He was gone he was a spring transfer portal guy too. He was gone for 9 months.
Yeah. And I think that with how important the safety room is going to be, especially under Jim Knowles, Zaki Wheatley, we know, is an awesome football player. DeJuan Lane is a guy everyone is very excited about. And then you look through the rest of the safety room, Vabu Torre, young guy, we'll see what he turns into. Lamont Payne, young guy, we'll see what he turns into. Then it's a trio of walk-ons, Jayshon Green, Carson, Keisa Wetter, and then Colin Dinkins, a guy who has ended up playing a little bit of football for Penn State, particularly on special teams. But it gets really thin in the safety room really early. And I think bringing in a guy like King Mac, who is going to step into a situation where he knows the guys he's going to be playing with. He understands kind of the expectation and the standard and all these sorts of things of Penn State's defense, was a big-time recruit coming in, a guy who people had really high expectations for. I didn't pay too terribly much attention to why he struggled at at Alabama. I believe I read a little bit that he's more of a play deep center fielder kind of guy, take advantage of his instincts. And I think Bama used him as more of a slot guy, but don't quote me on that. I'll have to do some double checking on that. And if he is put into a situation and a role that he is comfortable in Penn State's defense, that just takes care of a problem, or it helps act as an answer towards a problem in a position where Penn State, you're one DeJuan Lane sprained ankle away from having some real serious problems in your safety room.
Look what we just saw with KJ Winston. Everybody had to grow up a lot quicker.
Yeah. And, again, part of this is the novelty of how things are going to end up going with him. But I'm going to go with King Mac. For as excited as I am about both of those receivers and how I think both of them will fit into Penn State's team well and bring something different. I mean, both of them are adult guys who have been productive to one extent or another at a pair of programs that like to throw the football. And I think bringing those guys in, guys who have a little bit of versatility, is something that's going to be really good for Penn State.
Agreed.
I just really love the opportunity to add that little something to the defense to just kind of solidify things and fortify things. in a way, at a position where things could get hairy a little bit quickly.
One thing I do wonder is the safety room, and this is just purely speculation. Penn State always takes a freshman corner and tosses him at safety eventually. Zakee Wheatley started that way. Lamont Payne started that way. Lamont Wade was that way. Garrett Taylor was that way. Like Penn State's done that the entirety of the Franklin era. I believe Terry Smith said they start guys at corner sometimes to help improve ball skills and then move them to safety. Again, all speculation. So I'm got to imagine there's at least one young guy in that room who will have the position moved down to safety sooner or later.
Yeah, I think that's whether or not they end up doing that or not. Like, I just like the fact that they have another guy there, another guy who can help. And then I think it's worth mentioning Anai White, a guy who hasn't been super productive at Texas A&M. I don't know if it's due to injuries or what, but has played a little bit of football at Texas A&M. Was a monster recruit. Coming out of Pennsylvania. He was the number 2 guy in PA in his class behind Nick Singleton, number 51 overall player in the on-3 composite in his year. And he's a guy who's going to come in, has familiarity with Deion Barnes, is going to be stepping into a position. He suffered a season-ending injury in 2023 that I think kind of threw things off kilter for him. But he's a guy who's going to be coming into a position where you're going to be developed, you're going to have an opportunity to play if you could prove it. And I think it's like, I think he's a lottery ticket that I am very, very excited about, Matt.
I mean, Nolan Rucci,
incredibly excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely unrelated, but Nolan Rucci came in there, and he was a guy who Pennsylvania guy, went elsewhere, 5-star, highly sought after, didn't find the success he was looking for, came back home, and everything's kind of coming up his way. Again, very different positions, very different circumstances. But again, if Anai White can come out here and help you replace losing Abdul Carter, who I think might be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, it's great. You want as many bites at that apple as you can, and he's a great option.
Yeah, and even if he's a guy who doesn't, come good until 2026, like I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Like that'd be pretty sick. Like and it's just a good story, like you mentioned with Nolan Rucci.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about. Matt, is there anything else you want to add? Anything on like guys going to the NFL or anything like that you want to throw into the pod?
No, good for Kobe. Good for Keziah Izzard. Again, good for Abdul. Pretty cool moments. It's awesome that Nick and Katron are coming back. We talked about it last week. All the specialists are being retained. It's been a fun. This was my favorite part of the offseason, like this roster movement stuff. I think it's so fascinating. Penn State needs to hire a GM. I saw USC just hired Notre Dame's quote unquote GM away from them. Penn State, that's not that Kenny Sanders and those guys don't do a great job building that roster up, but you need somebody whose entire job is thinking about how to build this roster and plug those holes. Again, I don't know what that looks like in college football, but Penn State did a damn good job at, winning the first 3.5 weeks of the offseason. It's hard to imagine anybody feeling better about it than Penn State.
Yeah. What do you make of I think I've seen Stuart Mandel and Joel Klatt both put Penn State as the number 1 team on their big boards. Do you put any number 1 team in their like way too early top 25s? Do you like put any stock at all into those kinds of things?
No, I don't. I don't really care about it. I mean, people are kind of insane and care too much about what other people think. I like to talk about Penn State. I pay attention to Penn State mostly. If somebody comes to me and says, I think Penn State is the best team in the country, I will shake their hand and say, thank you so much. That's so fun. I don't really put that much stock into it. It's cool. Like, you want expectations at Penn State. Next year has to be a big year. They're building for it to be a big year. I don't care about outside expectations. So if I don't care about it, I can't imagine anybody in that locker room cares about it either. They haven't proven anything. Yeah. You don't have to prove anything to be the number 1 team in the country on January 26th of the year prior. Enjoy the ride, and if people want to keep saying they think Penn State's going to be good, I will keep saying thank you so much and recommend they listen to Roar Lions Roar Penn State podcast, available on all their podcasting platforms.
Yeah, I mean, this was a thing that came up a lot during the season when like playoff polls were coming out and everyone was freaking out about why is Penn State not higher? Why is Penn State here? Why is Penn State there? Like just
Who
when the
cares?
football games happen, yeah, like who gives a
Who
shit, man?
cares, man? Also, with that being said, I also love. I wish they put out an AP poll every single week, even in the off season. I think it's
No,
so much fun.
no,
I love it.
no, it's the worst. Like I truly do think that those set like a really bad not even a really bad expectation. It's just like you get so much built into your season based on what people think of you at the very beginning of the year.
Agreed.
Like if you are number 3 in the preseason poll and you go 9-3 against a team that was unranked in the preseason poll but also goes 9-3, you have more equity built into your 9-3, and I think that's like I don't like that. I want football to be based on what happens, not what we think might happen and what hypothetically could happen. So like
Don't tell the SEC
all these
that.
polls, like it at some point in the future, it will indeed mean more. But yeah, I think it's nice. I think it's cool. I do think the one thing I will say is that I do think a good amount of this is just like people trying to identify the trend of the last couple of national champions. And
It's the Big Ten.
no, and it's Big Ten teams that get guys to bypass the NFL, that are banking on continuity, that are, putting together multiple good recruiting and transfer portal classes. Like, I think there is an element of that. I think when Klatt did his top 25, that was like part of it with him. Like he basically said a reason that he was picking Penn State was because you look at what worked for Michigan and you look at what worked for Ohio State, and they are the team that's doing that, which fine, cool, whatever. I also think if you're trying to make your, say something based off of those trends without the context of everything else in the sport, you're probably like getting a bit over your skis. So
Agreed.
we'll see what happens. Regardless, it's nice to be going into a season. Um, I've gone into the, and we still have a ways to go. We don't know what's going to happen. I've gone into the last couple of seasons, Matt, thinking like, okay, maybe if this happens, then maybe this happens. The way things are going, I am not going to be scared of Penn State stepping onto a football field against anyone next year.
No.
We'll see what ends up happening, but like, it's an exciting time.
Penn State's in the driver's seat, I think, of like their own destiny more than they've been in a long
Could
time.
be.
So it's just cool.
Could be.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah.
We got a long way to go, though, brother.
Long way to go. Yeah, we'll find some other stuff to talk about. People need things to listen to while they're walking to dogs or driving to work, and we will do what we can to provide that to you. As always, thank you
I've been
everyone
watching
for listening.
Severance. I can talk about Severance for a half hour. People want me to do that.
I haven't seen an episode of it.
Oh, dude, John Turturro's great in it. He's awesome.
Great. He's also great in the Transformer movies.
Damn, what a great poll. I was really hoping you would go for the Transformers there and not like the Lebowski.
I can't. It's all because of TikTok. I know you are also on TikTok.
I am,
but like
I'm a Zoomer to my heart.
I'm not, but I have tendencies. Like you've certainly seen the TikToks that like do the, they play either What I've Done or New Divide by Linkin Park, and they then cut to like executive producer Michael Bay or directed by Michael Bay.
It's awesome.
Whatever it is. Yeah. And they make me laugh every single time. So I was actually on a bit of a Linkin Park kick today because of those two particular songs.
Nice.
Neither here nor there. I'm going to wrap the podcast up now. Thank you as always for listening to Roar Lions Roar. Make sure you go and subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast. If you use Apple Podcasts, please go and leave us a 5-star review. Spotify, go leave us 5 stars over there. Hop into the comments on episodes and say whatever you want. Be excited, be mean to Matt, be nice to me, whatever you want to do. If you are a YouTube person, hop on over to YouTube, subscribe to us there, go into the comments there and talk about Penn State football and whatever else you want to talk about in the comment section on YouTube. Make sure you're following us on all of our various social media channels. Just look for Roar Lions Roar. We're the ones talking about Penn State. And again, one last time, I want to say thank you to Home Field Apparel. Use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of the podcast. For Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
I want to wish an early congratulations to Ohio State defensive coordinator Bob Shoop.